Okay, fantastic. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Friday in the TEFL Development Hub. I've got a fantastic speaker along with me today. You might have seen from my LinkedIn post, from the post on Facebook, that Michael Goodine, he has been talking about tests for years, and and he actually calls it a hobby as well, which is something that I love. The fact that he's so passionate about the world of ELT that this is what he looks at in his free time. As well as kind of keeping up to date with all of the changes that are happening. And then we'll be talking about a few of those during this chat. He also takes some of these high stakes tests himself so that he can really get an idea of that user experience and give feedback on what it's like as a candidate to be in these sorts of positions. So, Michael, huge thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me. And that was a really lovely introduction. So thanks for that. And thanks for the opportunity. I always love a chance to chat about tests.
Well, we're going to be doing that for the next however long. I mean, we could probably talk for hours, but we'll
Sure
get
thing.
cracking. So, I mean, I guess the first question is, how did you first get interested in tests and in kind of the behind the scenes stuff of it all?
Well, I was working in a school in China around 2009. And one day the department head came in and said, we're going to change the whole English language curriculum to TOEFL preparation. TOEFL being, one of the big English tests. And, at the time I thought that was kind of silly and I still do. But, it got me on that path and it developed and helped me develop an interest in tests. And when I left that job in China, I found myself working in South America, in Paraguay. And I was just sort of freelancing at the time. So I had a lot of time to fill. So I thought, well, I'm going to do some test prep with students and I'll make a website about tests. And the website was designed for teachers because at that time it was hard to get a lot of good information about some of the big tests. So I started writing from that perspective. It eventually attracted a lot of students as well. So it kind of gave me a business helping people prepare for tests, but it also got me started writing about how tests are designed, the trends in tests and what they're used for. And that was, I guess, about 15 years ago. And I've just sort of kept it up since then. It's kind of been my full-time job since, I guess around 2015 or 2016.
Mhm. Cool, awesome. And interesting that you mention about TOEFL because I'm based in Spain and TOEFL, I mean, there are places that offer it, but it's
Mhm.
really not a huge exam. Why do you feel that there are some markets that have kind of attracted certain test preparation centers?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you've talked about that test in particular, and we can discuss that. But you know, since the pandemic era, um, the variety of tests that students can choose for high stakes purposes and for lower stakes has greatly expanded. So, when I got into the business, TOEFL and IELTS had sort of a duopoly on high stakes testing for university admissions and for immigration. That's those monopolies are completely gone now. There's so much competition. So, a test like the TOEFL, which might be perceived as particularly challenging or maybe perceived as having less customer support, um, is going to decline more than others, and it's going to be replaced by other tests. There's other trends, of course. I mean, different markets have different preferences for a variety of reasons, but I mean, to answer your question, there's just so much competition, which is great for score users, and it's also great for test takers as well.
Yep, yep. I mean, what other sort of changes have you noticed in the time since you've been really focusing on this?
Um, well, in addition to the variety of tests, the most striking thing is that tests are getting shorter. Um, when I was doing TOEFL back in China, then the test was 4.5 hours long. Um, that's another reason why TOEFL might be less popular. But that particular test is going to relaunch in January of next year as what appears to be a 90-minute test. So it's just been getting shorter and shorter and shorter over time. It was shortened in 2019. It was shortened in 2023. So that's one thing. the Pearson test of English, which has become quite popular since the pandemic. It's also a 2-hour test. And the Duolingo English test, which is just a sensation of the post-pandemic years, it's a 60-minute test. And these are all being used for the same purposes as what, used to be a 4.5-hour test.
Yeah.
So, and the market leader, of course, is still the IELTS, which is, like a 2-hour plus test. But that's probably going to come down as well whenever they get around to the so-called next generation IELTS. I wouldn't be surprised if that becomes a 2-hour test as well.
And you mentioned there Duolingo, which
Hmm.
I know has huge validity in some areas. I think in
Hmm.
Ireland particularly, it's been
Yeah.
widely accepted by universities. I mean, do you feel that certain tests are more credible than others?
No, not really. I mean, I'm not a psychometrician, so I don't know. Like, I can't tell you if one test is more valid than the other. But I mean, all of the major tests are backed by very vigorous research, which is done by, very serious psychometricians and other academics. So I trust that they're all doing what they say.
Hmm.
Um, for me, when people ask me to state what tests I like best, I mean, I'm thinking about things like flexibility for the students, um, cost, how accessible they are, and that sort of thing.
Hmm. Well, I mean, let's chat a little bit about your experience as a test taker. So,
Mhm.
what are some of the features that you've noticed certain exam boards offer that are particularly um, approachable or accessible, like you said, for
Mhm.
international test takers?
Well, the main development, I think, of the past few years is the ability to take tests from the comfort of your own home. So, in the early days, people would travel incredible distances to take a test, right? Some people were crossing international borders to take a test. So, in addition to the test fee, you're paying airfare, you're paying for a hotel, you're taking time off of work. And, in many of these cases, they call you up the day before and say, yeah, sorry, the test has been canceled. But don't worry, we're going to give you a free reschedule, but, good luck on the hotel and the airfare. So now, for an increasing number of tests, you just do it at home, whenever you feel like. You don't even have to schedule it in some cases. You just log in and take the test. That's huge. I mean, and
Mhm.
that makes education accessible now to a much wider range of students, which is
Mhm.
great because, higher education institutions are always talking about how they want to diversify, the pool of incoming students. And with more flexible tests, that's a little bit easier to do.
Mhm. And I know that you, as a test taker, you've written about the proctoring of some of
Hmm.
the remote tests.
Yeah.
What sort of things does that involve, and what have you found is the best option for exam boards to offer?
Well, yeah, this is a topic I've written about a lot in recent months, and this is a matter of much debate. So I don't profess to be an expert on this, and I could be wrong, but remote testing really kind of began like seriously during the early years of the pandemic, not just for English tests, but for um, you know, any kind of exams. So traditionally, you would log in to sort of an app or a secure browser, and that would give a proctor remotely the ability to access your computer. So they could browse through your files and they could just see what's running and shut it down. Some people worried about the privacy implications of this. That's another matter. And then traditionally, too, you would be subject to a room scan. So you would lift up your webcam or your laptop, show all the corners of your room, show under your table, under your chair, maybe show the hallway. Uh, Again, that's challenging, and I that's a process that personally I don't enjoy very much because you know being asked to like lift up my chair and like I'm getting older, it's tough. I've exited tests with a sore back from hoisting my chair above my head. And often you're asked to remove things from the walls, cover up like my bookshelf in the background with bed sheets. So that's the process that's used by most tests today. Um, increasingly, some of the newer tests are foregoing all of that. And you're not actually interacting with a live proctor who makes these requests. Instead, the test session is recorded, both the screen and your webcam, and it's reviewed after the test.
Mm,
A lot of people find that a little bit easier to handle. And some have argued that this is even better for security because it allows a more thorough checking, right? Like whoever's reviewing it can kind of go forward and backwards with the video and whatever. So those are the two main approaches. They're called synchronous and asynchronous proctoring, I believe.
hmm. Yeah. I mean, I guess there's no kind of foolproof
No,
system,
no,
maybe.
no, absolutely. Yeah, there's no foolproof system. Cheating happens both at test centers and at home.
Mhm.
It'll always happen. The testing companies will invest in security and it will get better. And then the cheaters will invest in cheating and they'll get better at cheating.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something that, we can discuss, but yeah, cheating definitely happens.
Yeah, because I mean, I to be honest, I'd always heard a lot of stories of exam fraud in Asia, particularly. And then a few years ago, there was an incident in Spain where people
Hmm.
were kind of using each other's IDs, or
Hmm.
they were finding a way around the system. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously, these are high stakes exams, but
Hmm.
why do you think exam fraud is so prevalent?
Well, I mean, the answer is, as you know, the answer is pretty obvious. That a high test score can mean the difference between going abroad and not. It can mean the difference between having an amazing life in another country or not. I mean, it's huge, right? It's these tests are of massive importance for a lot of people. So there's a great motivation to cheat.
Yep, yep. But it always amazes me. I mean, I guess then there are those cases of people who are using it purely to get a visa to get
Hmm.
into the country.
Hmm.
Um, but you always think, well, anyone who then went for a job interview, the person would
Hmm.
go, this doesn't match.
Yeah. Yeah, and and like especially for students, right? A lot of the people who cheat, I'm sure they get there, and maybe they just continue cheating on all of their assignments. I don't know, but I'm sure there's a ton of people who cheat and then flunk out
Mm,
of their year one studies, and then they end up going back home anyways.
yeah, yep.
But yeah, the cheating is it's an ongoing concern, not just for at home, but for test centers as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, like you said, I mean, people will always find a way, or they'll try to push the
Hmm.
limits of what they can get away with. Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
Okie dokie. Well, I mean, I guess one big thing that we could talk about is the future of tests.
Hmm.
Um, because we were chatting before about how AI might play a bigger role in
Hmm.
testing in the future. So what are your thoughts on that, or what have you noticed happening so far?
Yeah, AI has really become like a huge part of it. Now, it's always been involved for a very long time. The TOEFL test introduced AI scoring in the writing section of the test, I think back in about 2009, which is like way before the AI era. And I mean, it's a somewhat basic AI system. It's not like a chat GPT as we know it now, but it's just like adding up features. So they just
Mhm,
count like all the article errors in the writing and all the subject verb agreement errors, whatever, and then they spit out a result based on that. So that's always been involved in a combination with humans.
mhm,
But the big part, like the Duolingo test, which has been around for more than a decade now, like it's kind of known for being like mostly AI. I mean, there is a little bit of human involvement, kind of double checking things afterwards, I think. But it's mostly known for being a test which is wholly AI scored, both for speaking and writing. So you're going to see more of that because it greatly reduces the cost of administering the test. However, the Pearson test of English was also known as a test which was purely AI scored for many, many years. They've recently brought in humans to work alongside the AI. And that's a response to various score users. I think most notably the Australian Department of Home Affairs that are like, if you want us to accept your test, you better bring in some humans. So it's not just a progression towards like pure AI. It
Mm.
comes and it goes, you know. But we'll probably see more AI. The IELTS test, which is of all the major tests, probably the most traditional. They've been the people at Cambridge who designed that test have recently been publishing some research about the possibility of replacing the human examiners for the speaking section who, as you know, carry out a live interview, the possibility of replacing them with a chatbot,
Mm.
which would be huge, right? That'd be like the biggest change to IELTS ever. I don't know if it's necessarily going to happen anytime soon, but they've certainly been publishing research studying this possibility. So you'll get that.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, like certainly for the Cambridge exams, the examiners follow a script and there's
Hmm.
no real deviation
Hmm.
from that. So, to be honest, a chatbot could do that. They don't have to respond to anything necessarily. I mean, how do you feel that that human interaction affects the authenticity of a test?
Um, I think it certainly does, right? Like the benefit of a human over chatbot is that the human can kind of coax out your real ability with the language. You know, they can show you some patience that a chatbot might not, and they can really kind of draw out your ability and give you the opportunity to really get credit for what you know.
Hmm.
That's something that the chatbots may not be as good at.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, there's a lot of test takers who prefer AI. They're worried that maybe the examiners could have some bias against them for some reason. And they also worry that when you're doing 4 million tests a year, that quality control could be tough to maintain, for every single instance. Whereas with the AI, it's pretty much an identical quality each time.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
pros and cons for sure. For me, I personally, I kind of hope the IELTS doesn't go that way because you want the students to have so many different options and choice. And if all the tests just go with AI chatbots or just AI grading, then the students certainly have less choice, and
Yeah.
that's bad for them in the long run.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting what you said there about it being able to coax that language from the
Hmm.
candidates, because it's one thing that I've always loved about the Trinity
Hmm.
exam is that the interaction in the speaking exam it is much more natural. The
Hmm.
and the role of the examiner is really, like you say, to get the candidate to show what they
Yep.
can
Yeah.
produce.
Yeah.
Whereas sometimes, where the exams are much more scripted, you
Hmm.
think, well, how does that question encourage
Hmm.
students to use anything beyond past simple, even at,
Yeah.
B2, C1 level?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm all for more humans rather than more AI.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, like I like AI, I like humans, of course. I love some of my best friends are humans. But like, choice, right? You want the people to have the choice between AI or human. And it's not just between like AI and a chatbot. I mean, there's other tests where it's just like they give you a prompt and then there's a countdown and then you respond. I mean, that's a whole different thing. And so you
Mm.
you want people to have that choice as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, we've talked about some of the best features. So you said obviously, now being able to do these exams remotely offers up a lot more accessibility. What do you think are some of the worst features? Because for me, for example, that here's the question, here's
Mhm.
a countdown to start speaking,
Yeah.
that seems really unnatural.
Yeah, I'm not a fan. I don't want to say I'm not a fan because again, it doesn't matter, right? Because if you don't like that, you just take something else. However, yeah, those types of questions can be really like really tough. And then, it's just like a 15-second countdown and then a terribly loud beep. And then it's like go, 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 go. And then beep, the microphone cuts off. I hope the tests don't overuse something like that.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I uh I hate to keep taking it away from the test content itself, but the one thing that bugs me the most in tests is kind of gouging on fees and supplementary fees. So it's one thing that a test costs like $300, like fine, whatever. But there's tests where you're paying like an extra $25 to send the scores to a school, right? Like this is done electronically at no cost to the test provider. So it's that sort of thing. And then added fees for rescheduling fees that are particularly onerous. These things kind of these are features which are going away like more and more, but some tests, like particularly the more traditional tests, still utilize them. Not a big fan.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And I mean, it's something that we were chatting about as well beforehand with this idea of introducing more AI,
Mhm.
reducing the human element in these tests. Will that be reflected in the fees that the students are being asked to pay? I mean, do you
Mhm.
think that can you see any reduction in the cost of these exams?
No, no, I don't. Because the costs keep going up. They go up. Like some tests will raise the prices twice a year, right? Um, the most expensive place to take like an IELTS, for example, I think is now Switzerland, where it's like $480 or something. They just keep going up and up and up. So I don't foresee prices coming down anytime soon. Um, I think we talked a moment ago about the relaunch of the TOEFL test next year. I mean, I got my fingers crossed that that might come with a reduction in price because that test is being relaunched in such a fundamental way. Everything's changing, and it will be fundamentally cheaper to develop and administer. So, I'm hopeful that might bring the price down, but for the most part, no, no, they
Mhm.
just keep going up and up.
Yeah. And of course, if they're relaunching, there's all the associated costs with marketing the relaunch and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. But
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
it, I don't know. We'll keep an eye on the prices. For me, it's the prices, and then, as I said, those supplementary fees. Some of these test makers, they can really get a lot from their test takers.
Yep, yep, definitely. Yeah. And um I am much less familiar with IELTS. I mean, it is an exam
Hmm.
that is offered here in Spain,
Okay.
but generally people go for the Cambridge exams. But
Yeah.
am I right that IELTS is just a single exam, whatever level you're at, and then you're kind of scored by how much you achieve of what the test offers?
Basically, yeah. They do have some variations. So they have an IELTS academic test, which is used for university admissions. That's the most common one. I think it makes up probably like 75% of all the administrations. And so that's just a single test which places you on a scale. I guess it starts, I guess, maybe A1, A2, and then it just places you up to like C2. But they do have a separate test called the IELTS general test, which is used for migration. Um, and they also too have, I guess it's called the IELTS life skills, which is just used for people who need a test to prove they're at A1 or A2
Hmm.
level.
Hmm.
It's also used for migration mostly.
What do you feel are the benefits or drawbacks of that style of test compared to something like the Cambridge, where you do a B2 exam, you do a C1 exam?
I think a lot of the test makers now that are emerging are sort of a lot are moving towards that model where you want a B2 test or a B1 test or whatever. Some of the newer ones, for example, I took the skills for English test from PSI. It has that model. I kind of like that. Um, it makes the test a little bit less like intimidating, right, for students, because if you're taking a traditional test that measures you up to the C2 level, you're going to get these questions that are just impossible for you to answer if you're not at a C2 level. There's just really hard questions, which can be intimidating and kind of spoil your mood for the rest of the test because you think, oh, geez, I've really messed up. So a test that's simply targeted at the level you need is very attractive.
Mhm.
So yeah, and I appreciate that. Also there is some test makers might be kind of moving towards the idea of adaptive tests, which is another option. So the questions are just adapting to your ability level, so you can possibly avoid some of these really impossible questions.
Well, I mean, I guess that's something that we might see AI being used to develop further in the
Hmm.
future, kind of a much more personalized test. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I've seen it trialed, not in a testing sense, but in exam preparation in UK schools for kind of
Hmm.
15, 16-year-olds. They're trialing it to
Hmm.
so that they have much more personalized instruction,
Hmm.
which I think is great. And if it was a personalized test that,
Hmm.
pushed you in the right directions, that would be amazing. Mhm.
Yeah. You know, the one of the innovations that's probably like being worked on at Duolingo now, there's a woman there named Alina von Davier. She's kind of the genius behind a lot of the innovations there. What she's been talking about are these, what does she call them? I mean, they're basically personalized adaptive tests. So the test, not just the difficulty level, but the content of the test is adapted to whatever purpose that you're taking it
Mm.
for. So, for example, I mean, the obvious one would be like if you're going into a STEM program, you're probably going to want, you could benefit from a different English test than in a humanities program.
Mhm.
But, also if you're taking the test for, getting a license for, working as a pharmacist, you might want a different test, whatever. So there are like, obviously there's tests for these different purposes. Like there's a whole ecosystem of these tests, but the idea that you could have like a single test that adapts to your personal purposes is
Yeah,
great, I think. And that's
yeah,
something I'd love to see more of.
yeah. I mean, that would be amazing. And I mean, that leads me on to something else that I was thinking about before that really bugs me about certain tests, which seems like it might not be such an issue with IELTS if there's IELTS academic and IELTS
Hmm.
general. But
Hmm.
the fact that when you get to these higher level exams,
Hmm.
it tends to become much more academic, and
Hmm.
people aren't necessarily taking the exam for academic purposes.
Hmm.
They're not academic people. They just have a passion for language and want to demonstrate their level. I mean, I guess IELTS has already coped with that
Hmm.
through having an IELTS general.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and you're probably quite familiar too with the lower stakes exams, which are not used for migration or for university, but just for a variety of purposes, whether it's personal interest or placement or kind of buffering your CV for your job.
Mhm.
So, there's a huge number of such tests as well, right? And there's the TOEIC test, which is just has questions about invoices and receipts and business communications. And then there's other tests like the aptis or the English score test from British Council and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah, I
tests
mean,
for every purpose.
yeah. Yep, there are tests for everybody, tests for every purpose. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and then obviously it's up to the candidate to kind of identify as well what the requirements are for them. Um,
Hmm.
whether they need an IELTS or
Hmm.
a Cambridge or if Aptis or something else is
Hmm.
accepted. Hmm.
Yeah. And what you see now, like if you go into your like Wayback Machine and look at a website for a university, international students from 10 years ago, you would see they accept two tests, maybe three. But if you go and look at the same website today at a university, even just a university, you might see they accept 5, 6, 10 tests. So a lot of choice.
Yep. Yep. Awesome. What test taking have you got coming up soon?
Um, I I took a test a couple days ago called the ITEP, which it's based in the US and they're accepted at, I don't know, they probably got a few hundred receiving schools in the US. Notably, a big user of ITEP scores was NYU in New York, which is actually like a pretty big deal because I think that's the school in the US with the most international students, like at a single campus. So, but very small, very kind of lesser known, but it had some fun features. I was happy to try. The Pearson Test of English, the PTE, has recently changed I think possibly like yesterday, they introduced some new question types. And that was when, as I said, they introduced human raters for more of the test. So I'd like to try that one. And the Duolingo test also changed last month. So I might try that.
Mhm.
So it's I mean, as I said, everybody needs a hobby, right?
Yep, yep. And the fact that you then share all this information with potential test takers, with teachers. Obviously, a lot of the time you tag the exam boards as well, so that they're getting that sort of feedback as well. I think that's great. Yep, fantastic.
Yeah. I actually spoke to someone and, somebody online on LinkedIn, and he said, how do you do this? He said, do you pay for all these? And I'm like, yeah, sometimes, yeah, but other times the test makers are happy to give a voucher. And he said, do you think I could get a voucher like, if I tell them I'll write about it? I said, sure, yeah. So, if anyone out there wants to kind of get into this sort of thing, like, don't hesitate to maybe reach out to somebody like in PR at one of these tests and say, hey, I want to like learn about your test and maybe write about it and help people learn more about it. I bet you like they would, be happy to provide a voucher so you can take it at no cost.
Mm,
A nice
interesting.
form of professional development for
Yeah,
teachers.
definitely, definitely. I mean, did you find, were you more able to approach the exam boards once you were already writing about this? Like, does it help to kind of have a bit of a backup and say, look, I've already written about things rather than just going, hey, I fancy doing something new. Let me do a test.
Yeah, yeah, it does. Obviously, it does. Yeah. But like these days, everybody has like a social media footprint, right? So, you just say, hey, look, I've got 2,000 connections on LinkedIn. I write about education. People are interacting. So you don't need to have like a profile, right? I guess maybe I'm wrong, but it's
Mhm,
great for professional development. And then because there's so much competition, especially you start with the smaller tests, they would be happy to get the attention, I'm sure.
mhm, mhm. Fantastic. I mean, your CV, if you were going for jobs anywhere that required any sort of English certification, you'd be foot in the door easy.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, like for me, most of what I do is teaching. Um, Most of what I do, like professionally, is just teaching, so it helps for that. And I do some consulting now and then if people want to know more about the industry.
Mhm. Awesome. Cool. Well, Michael, thank you so much for coming along today. For anyone who's been watching on YouTube, there haven't been any comments, but if you've got any questions, follow Michael on LinkedIn. I'll add a link to his profile on the show notes. And definitely keep following because, as he said, things are changing. Things change frequently. Unfortunately, just when we think we've got our preparation down to a T, then they come along and introduce new test types or change things completely. So yeah,
Mm.
huge thanks, Michael, for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm very happy to have the opportunity.